Wonder why we can't have nice things in Canada anymore, like healthcare, like nutritious food, like homes? It's because we're making less stuff and spending more buying it, and borrowing and printing money to pay the difference. That bids up costs and leaves us with rising debt and interest rates. Everything is broken, and the country is broke. It's the worst. No, really, it's the worst. Under Trudeau, Canada has had the worst growth in income per person, or GDP per capita, of any prime minister since the 1930s. Canada's housing inflation has been the worst in the G7 since he took office, and doubled rent and mortgage costs. The OECD has calculated Canada's economic growth will be the worst of nearly 40 advanced countries this decade, and, you guessed it, the worst for the next 3 decades, meaning if you are a young person today, your wages and living standards will fall further and further behind youth in other advanced countries. Canada has had the worst growth in real income per person in the G7 since 2015, down 2%, while our closest neighbor is up 8%. It wasn't like this before. Look back. Our GDP per person used to grow at almost exactly the same rate as the US. And then, this. What happened? He happened. Even liberal economists like Trevor Tombe are noticing. Quote, Ontario, for example, has a per-person level of economic output that is similar to Alabama. The Maritimes are below Mississippi, and Quebec and Manitoba lag behind West Virginia. Only Alberta exceeds the U.S. average of $76,000. No wonder Alberta has cut taxes and red tape and embraced free enterprise. In fact, the economy of one U.S. state, Texas, is now bigger than the economies of all Canada's provinces and territories combined. That's right, with 10 million fewer people, Texas has a bigger economy than all of Canada. Incidentally, Canadian companies have been leaving us for the Lone Star State. It's not because we're not working as hard. It's just that we're not producing as much. Productivity is output per hour worked. Canadians worked a total of 34.6 billion hours in 2023 to generate a GDP of $1.8 trillion US. That works out to about $53 an hour US. That's compared to $78 per hour in the US. That means they produce nearly 50% more economic value per hour than we do, which means they can make more in less time. According to an RBC report, the productivity gap with the US now stands at about $20,000 per person a year. So why are we producing less? We're just as smart, we have more resources and land per capita, and we have the best workers in the world. The problem is, they don't get the same tools and technologies to make things. Economists give tools and technology a name: capital. Capital is nothing new. Since our primal ancestors built huts, wheels, or bows and arrows, we had capital. Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations explained that in a tribe of hunters or shepherds, a particular person makes bows and arrows, for example, with more readiness and dexterity than any other. He frequently exchanges them for cattle or for venison, and gets more cattle and venison than if he himself went to the field to catch them. The hunter is the laborer. The bow and arrow is capital, like the carpenter, the hammer, the painter, the brush, the pianist, the piano, the fisherman, the boat. Ugly socialist ideologies like fascism and communism try to turn labor against capital, worker against business owner. But labor and capital need each other. Often the laborer owns the capital, like the fisherman who owns his boat. If there were no profit in buying a fishing boat, no one would do it. The fisherman would not leave the shores, and you'd have no fish on your plate. Or burgers. If you like burgers, then you'll like this machine back here. This is capital. We wonder what capital is. Capital is advanced machinery like this. Tell me what this machine does and why somebody who likes cheeseburgers should care about it.
So this is a column dumper. All the ingredients that you need to make your hamburger are going to go into the buggy. The buggy's going to rise up. It's going to dump into a mixer. That mixer is going to mix all the ingredients for your juicy hamburger. It will go into a former, and then it will go into a freezer, and then it will go onto our conveyor system.
Look over at that conveyor system right over there. That's also capital, right?
It is also capital, and it will go go into a packaging machine, into a box, into a truck, into the grocery store.
So that people can have a nutritious, delicious, protein-packed hamburger brought to them at the lowest possible price with the highest possible health, safety, and nutritional value. And your workers, of whom I think you have about 300,
yes,
can have big, powerful paychecks, right?
Absolutely.
But to do that, they need machines which economists call capital.
Capital is also called investment. When you divide the amount of business investment by the number of workers in the country, you see that in 2023, Canadian workers got 58 cents of investment for every dollar a U.S. worker got, and only 65 cents for every dollar workers in the OECD got. So who do you think is going to make more cheeseburgers? Their farm workers get more tractors. Their food packaging workers get higher-powered machines to move and pack it. Their truckers get newer and more efficient trucks to ship the food. So their workers make more money making more food more affordably. The same is true for homes or computer chips or auto parts or anything else we make. So if our investment is leaving, where's it going?
There will be a giant sucking sound going south. There will be a giant sucking sound going south.
Today, that sucking sound is Canada's money, machines, businesses, and paychecks heading south. These bars show the net inflow or outflow of investment between Canada and the U.S. this century. When the bars are above the line, it means more investment is moving from them to us than from us to them. Below the lines means we are losing money. From the year 2001 until 2014, 14 straight years, Canada won the investment tug-of-war. We were beating the Americans. Then, in 2015, something happened, and the money started flowing in the opposite direction. Every year on record since 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, the Americans took more investment from us than we got from them, now totaling $460 billion, or $11,500 more per person leaving Canada for the U.S. than we got back. Our money building factories, mines, machines, technology companies that pay American wages. What happened? He happened. It was only 9 years ago, the very liberal New York Times found that Canada's middle class was richer than America's. 9 years of growing taxes, housing costs, bureaucratic gatekeeping that block major projects have driven money, business, and high-skilled workers away. Even the CBC admitted the number of Canadians leaving to the U.S. has hit a 10-year high, with 126,340 people leaving in 2022, up 70% from a decade before. People leaving cited Canada's housing, after Trudeau doubled the cost, access to doctors, after Trudeau tax hikes pushed physicians to leave, and high taxes and crime, driven by liberal spending and catch-and-release laws. And it's about to get a lot worse. Running out of money and worried about a debt downgrade from rating agencies, Finance Minister Freeland has announced a job-killing tax on healthcare, home building, small business, and farmers. Taxing farmers drives up food costs. Taxing doctors makes it harder to find one. Taxing home builders means fewer homes. And taxing small businesses means fewer paychecks. Businesses, jobs, doctors, and food production will leave Canada. A capital gain is the difference between what an investor paid to buy and later what he got to sell his investment. Right now, investors are taxed on 50% of their gains. After this latest tax hike, they will be taxed on 66% of it. This despite the fact that capital gains are already taxed multiple times. First, capital gains come from businesses reinvesting their earnings to grow. Government already taxes those earnings once. Then, much of the gain on an investment is eaten up by inflation. If you buy a company for $100 and sell it for $110, but inflation has totaled 5%, your real gain is $5, but you're taxed on the full $10 gain. To summarize, given that capital gains are already double taxed and partly inflated away, adding new taxes is unfair. With this tax hike, Canada's capital gains tax will be one of the highest in the advanced world, so businesses, jobs, and money will pour out of our country at an even faster rate. There is good news for some and bad news for others. The good news is that if you are extremely wealthy, you'll get around this tax hike. For example, Justin Trudeau kept his family fortune, which he inherited from his grandfather, in a tax-sheltered trust fund to avoid taxes.
I no longer have dealings with the way our family fortune is managed.
And Freeland gave billionaires an escape hatch. She waited 2 months after she announced the tax hike before it took effect, giving billionaires plenty of time to sell their holdings without paying the higher rate and move their money to lower-taxed foreign countries where it will build businesses, factories, mines, railroads, and other job-creating investments over there. We know that this is already happening because the government's own estimates demonstrate it. Look closely at the budget projections for the tax change. This year, the tax change is only in place for 6 months, June onward, yet it generates $6.9 billion. Next year, it is in place for all 12 months, yet the revenue from it crashes to $3.4 billion. And the year after that, it drops to $375 million, about what the government spends every 7 hours. Why? Because the extra money the government gets this year is not from people paying the tax hike, but from people avoiding the tax hike by quickly selling investments and realizing gains before the hike comes into force on June 25th. These gains are taxed at the lower rate, but because the volume of transactions is so high, the government gets a short-term sugar high of revenue. If someone is going to sell their investment to avoid paying this tax, are they going to reinvest the proceeds here, knowing that they will have to pay it in the future? Of course not. Rather, they will simply reinvest the money in another country where the tax hike does not apply at all. So who will pay? 1. People who have one-time sales or disposals of long-term assets, like this wonderful grandmother.
93-year-old Liz Diachin has had this farm property in Warkworth, northeast of Coburg, for 58 years. Across the road in front of her home is a small plot of land she owns. Since her daughter and grandson each currently rent homes, she decided to give them the land to help out.
And I said, why should I pay capital gain? You know, I'm not selling it to them. I'm gifting it to them.
Second, 300,000 businesses, many of them small businesses, and indirectly their workers will pay this tax hike based on the government's own numbers. These businesses will stop investing in machines, factories, and other equipment that workers use to earn wages. It goes right through the food chain. Because the tax hike punishes farmers, we will have fewer farmers producing food. One restaurant owner told me he just turned down a chance to invest in a new restaurant because of the tax and is instead leaving Canada. So who will give students their first jobs? What happens to the out-of-work waitresses who have kids to feed? Where will you go for dinner? The tax punishes doctors, which means your family physician could leave Canada.
We're trying to hold up a healthcare system that's crumbling around us. We really cannot introduce new reasons for physicians to scale back their practice, particularly community family medicine practice. It's simply the wrong move.
Because it punishes home building, there will be fewer homes built, and you will eventually pay more to buy or rent. And after investors leave, who will be left to pay the taxes? You. Just like you got the bill after Trudeau promised 9 years ago that some rich guy on a hill somewhere would pay for all his spending.
Canadians pay enough in taxes, except the middle class should pay less taxes and the wealthiest Canadians should pay more.
Yet, a decade later, and 9 in 10 middle-class families pay more income tax. And, despite Trudeau claiming the carbon tax would make you better off, 100% of middle-class families pay more in carbon tax than they get back in rebates. And for the first time since the Great Depression, the middle class can't afford homes or food. As for that rich guy on the hill, well, he's never been richer.
At a time when the richest are only getting richer,
After 9 years of Trudeau, Justin Trudeau is not worth the cost. To fix what he broke, we need to overhaul the system to make taxes low, simple, and fair. That's why within 60 days of becoming Prime Minister, I will name a tax reform task force of entrepreneurs, investors, farmers, and workers, but no lobbyists, to design a bring it home tax cut that will 1. Bring home production and paychecks with lower taxes on work, hiring, and making stuff. 2. Bring home fairness by reducing the share of taxes paid by the poor and middle class while cutting tax-funded corporate welfare and cracking down on overseas tax havens. 3. bring home 20% less paperwork by simplifying tax rules. Lower, simpler, fairer. We will unlock the potential of our strivers, inventors, builders, entrepreneurs, and workers to restore Canada's promise. Those who go sleepless nights mortgaging their homes, wondering how they'll pay employees, will have their eventual success rewarded and not vilified. Instead of turning workers against business owners, we'll turn workers into business owners. We'll axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. We will be a country where hard work earns powerful paychecks and pensions that buy affordable food, gas, and homes in safe neighborhoods. Now, let's bring it home.